Hi, this is Jesper Sandell from Velocitypeak.com, and in today's Cinema 4D tutorial, I want to show you how to build this. So we'll be using the new field force in R21 as well as the new volume type. And all the project files are available for download on Velocitypeak.com. You'll find all the details below the video. Okay, let's do it. Okay, so let's go ahead and build this. And we'll be using a lot of new features from R21, the new field force, but also the new type of volume in the volume builder. So we're going to generate some thinking particles, and then we're going to use the field force to drive those particles, and then we're going to use the good old tracer to create the trails. But it all starts with a text object, so let's start there now. Let's go to the splines menu and let's add text. And then I'm going to just write C4D. And then let me get a different angle. And the font, I used Korolev Condensed Heavy. Now, obviously use any font that you want. And I'm going to align this to the middle. And because we're going to have the trails on the outside of the text, I just want to space this out a little bit. So let's set the horizontal spacing to 10. And let's put this in an extrude object. So hold down the Alt or Option, extrude. And I'm going to extrude this 300. This is going to be a fairly long object. And I also want some caps, so let's go to the caps, and let's do 2. And I think that's good. So now I actually want to make a copy of this, because I'm going to use one of the text objects for the volume builder, but I'm also going to use one as the centerpiece of the text, or for the splines later on. So I'm going to make a copy. So I'm going to Alt drag this one. In fact, Control drag it. And then I'm going to put this in a null. So Alt G. And I'm going to call this one visible text. And I'm going to turn it off. I'm going to hide it for now. We don't need it. So I'm going to call this one extrude for volume. And then we're going to put this in a volume object. So let's go get the volume builder, and let's stick this guy in there. So in the volume builder, the voxel size right now is 10. Let's just set it down to 2. When we render this, I'm going to set it to a lower value, I think 0.5, just to be closer to the actual text. But the volume type, instead of a signed distance field, we're going to use the new vector. And this is new for R21. So you can see these little arrows. If I zoom in here, they're not arrows, but these are, they indicate a direction. And that's just what a vector is. It's just a direction. So, and this is going to be perfect for us later on. I don't necessarily need to see this, so I'm going to hide the volume builder. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to generate the thinking particles. And the way we're going to do that is simply go to the MoGraph menu and get the matrix. And in the matrix, the mode I'm going to change from grid array to object. And the object is going to be the extrude for volume. And right now we're generating matrices only, but we are going to generate thinking particles. And that's the base setup. So if I actually hide the matrix right now, you can see that we have thinking particles. We can't control them yet, but we have them in the scene, and we can increase the count if we want. Let's set this up to, say, 100 as we work. So now what I want to do is I want to create something that can control the thinking particles, and we need to use just a little bit of Expressor, but it's a really simple setup. So let's add a null, and type in Expresso. And then we need to add an Expresso tag. So right click and in here, programming tags, Expresso. And then we just need 2 nodes in here. So let's right click, say new node, thinking particles. And to initiate the whole thing, we use this one, the P pass. And then right click, new node, thinking particles. And then this is a new one, the dynamic, and then the force object. And then we're going to connect this one to this one. Now the force object needs an object. You can see that we have an object field. And we're going to use the force field for that. But we haven't created that one yet. So let's do that now. Let's go to simulate forces and the brand new field force. And then I'm going to take the field force and I'm going to drag it on top of this node here. And that's it. That's all the Expressor we need to do. It's all set up. So I'm going to close this window. And I'm going to drag the field force down to the bottom. And then in the field force settings, the velocity type, instead of add to velocity, I want to set an absolute velocity. And I'm going to increase the strength to 200. So in the field force, we also need to add something that's going to drive this field force. And what we're going to use is the volume builder. And we want to use it as a volume object. And now you can see that we have all these arrows. And these are the same type of arrow. They're not arrows, but I refer to them as arrows. Same type of directional indicators that we have in the volume builder. But we don't need to see that, so I'm going to turn off the visibility. But now we have a force. And if we play this now, it's not going to do exactly what we want yet, but we can see that something is happening. So we need to add a field to this, and a field that's going to drive this. So we're going to add the field to the volume builder. Now, let me show you an example. If I go to show you. So here's one example that you're probably going to see a lot of examples of. This is an obvious use of the new field force, where you can create these really interesting spiraling effects on objects. Play that again. So we're not going to work on this today, but I'll stick it in the downloads in case you want to tinker with it. So let's go back to our tutorial here. And what I want to use is actually just a linear field. So let me bring in a linear field. And in the volume builder, I'm going to drag the linear field in there on top of the extrude. And now I want to set the mode. Instead of a normal, I'm going to use the new cross. This is new in R21 as well. So if I simply just play this back now, it's still not quite working. One thing that we want to do, if I click on the linear field, is under the creation space, instead of box, I'm going to set this to objects below. And now if I play this, we have a little bit more going on. And to get this a little clearer, what's happening, I'm going to add the tracer. So in the MoGraph menu, let's go to the tracer, and I'm going to just pull that to the bottom. And then the trace link, I don't want the volume builder. I'm going to delete that. Instead, I'm going to use the matrix. So now, if I play it back now, you can see we're starting to create some pretty interesting shapes there. We're creating some trails. And if I go to the linear field, right now we have a length of 100 and the direction is plus x. Set this up to a really high number, say 2000. Zoom out a little bit. So now you see we can create these pretty interesting trails, and depending on the direction that you set here on in the linear field, you can get some completely different looks. And you can do some pretty interesting things. For example, if you go into the matrix and you say instead of distribution surface, what if you do say edge, rewind and play? You can get some really cool stuff that we certainly couldn't do before R21. So I've only just scratched the surface on what we can do with this, but it is really, really interesting. So, but anyway, I'm gonna set this back to surface, and then I'm gonna go back into the volume builder, and then the linear field. In fact, I'm gonna go to the linear field, and instead of 2000, I'm gonna set this to be just 25, and I'm gonna do Z plus. So if I play this now, you can see that it forms our text. So what I want to do is I want to animate this linear field to basically reveal them. So if I would take my linear field and drag it to the other side, say something like this. If I put that in the middle, play this back, you can see it's just going to play on one side. So I want to animate this, so I'm going to go to about here, a little closer perhaps, and I'm going to use a timeline. I have 150 frames on the timeline, so I'm going to go to the linear field, and then I'm going to go to the coordinates tab, and I'm going to just hit a keyframe, and then I'm going to go to frame 140, and then I'm going to actually we have to play through. When we work with the tracer and thinking particles, we actually have to play through so we can see the entire thing. Okay, so 140, and I'm going to pull this over to the end, something like that, and set a keyframe. So now we have a keyframe. If I play this back now, something's happening, but it's not doing exactly what we expected it to, and that's because we're missing one step, and it's not that obvious. If I go back into the linear field, I want to click this box, click to shape. And now that we play it back again, you're going to see that it's going to work. See, now they're starting to form, and here we go. Okay, so that's good. So I need a lot more splines, so I need to up the count. So I'm going to go to the tracer. In fact, I'm going to go to the matrix object, and down here we have a count. And I'm going to set this count pretty high. I'm going to set it to 1500. And then I'm going to go back to the first frame. And then I'm going to also go into the volume builder. The voxel size right now is 2 centimeters. But I'm going to reduce that to 0.5 just to more closely match the actual text. And then I want to do one more thing. I want to go to the tracer, and I want to switch the intermediate points from none to uniform so that we have evenly spaced points. And I am going to set, instead of a linear, I'm going to do a Bezier. Now that we've done that, we're going to have a better result. But it's going to be a lot slower when we play this back. See, we can barely play even one frame. And the way we're going to solve that is we're simply going to bake this animation out. And the best way to bake it out, as far as I know at least, is to use File, Export. We want to make sure that the tracer is selected. And then we do Export, and then we export to an alembic. And once we export this to an alembic, we're going to be able to bring this back into the scene, and we're going to be able to scrub back and forth. So I want to start frame 0 and frame 149. I'm actually cutting off the last frame because usually you get some craziness with the tracer on the last frame. So I'm just going to avoid that by cutting it short one frame. And I want to make sure that I have selection only ticked, and then splines. The rest I'm going to leave as it is, and then I'm going to click OK. Now, when I click OK, it's actually going to take a little while to do, so I have cheated. So I'm simply going to cancel out of this because I already baked a version out. So I'm going to go to File, Merge Project, and this is what you do after you bake out your alembic. Merge Project, You want to choose that alembic you just baked out. And then let's bring it in. It's going to leave all this as is. I'm going to click OK. Let me pull that to the bottom. Now that we have this as a separate animation, I can turn off the tracer, turn off the visibility. I can actually turn off the field force. I can turn off the volume as well. I can turn off the matrix. All these things we can turn off. Now we still have them in the scene. This is just a refresh issue. So if I play a few frames forward, go back, they should disappear. Yes, they're gone. And then if we play this now, you can see that there's the animation. And then I can go back and forth. I can scrub on the timeline, like so. So this is actually pretty close. But I do want to add some hair material to this. Of course, if you're working with Octane or Redshift, or I originally rendered this out with Cycles 4D, then you can just add, say, a curve tag. But we can use hair as well. So if we go into Create Materials, and then New Hair Material, and let's put that on the tracer. And let's change a few settings here. Let me pull this over. In the colors, they're pretty ugly, these colors. So I'm going to choose something between blue and green, a little brighter, something like that, perhaps. And then this one, I'm going to make orange, partial to this blue-orange combination. And maybe something like that. Click OK. You can play around with this. In the one that I worked on before, I didn't use specular. I didn't use transparency, but I certainly changed the thickness. 1 centimeter is way too thick. I set this to be 0.5, I think. And then you can put some variation there. I'm just going to leave as is. I think I enabled length, just a little bit of variation in the length. And then that's it. Let's go ahead and let's check the render settings. I'm using the standard renderer, and when you add the hair material, it automatically adds the hair render here. And I guess I'm going to do a 1920 by 1080. And I'm just want to test this, so I'm going to do the current frame. And then let's just see what we get. So that's it. There we have it. So that's the hair material. I think I'm happy with the hair material. I don't want to go too crazy on the brightness for the material, because I think it's better to probably add glows and other things in, say, After Effects. So I don't want it to be too bright. But we're certainly missing the centerpiece, and we should use a different type of camera. So let's close this. And then the centerpiece is the visible text that we hid in the beginning. And you can see that it fairly closely matches, the actual text matches the splines pretty well. And that's because we used 0.5 in the volume builder. Now, let's go to frame 140, which is the final animation. And I'm going to push this visible text back a little bit. So maybe something like that. I'd want the trails to be a little in front, something like that. And then I'm going to keyframe this text coming forward as well. So let me go to visible text and then the coordinates tab. And I'm just going to set a keyframe for the Z position. Let's zoom out a little bit. And then let's go to frame 20 or so, where I can still see the trails, and let's push this text back to, say, something like that. And I'm going to set another keyframe, and then I'm going to move that keyframe to the beginning. So together now we have something like this. And the keyframes by default are going to be easy ease, which is exactly what I want. So that's good. Let's choose a different type of a camera. And let's look through the camera. And I want to have, instead of a 36, I want a longer lens, like a 80 millimeters. And then for the final framing, I think I want something like this, just so it becomes a little bit more majestic when you're looking up towards it like this. And so that's good. Now we also need to add some sort of material to this text. We're not really going to see it. It's just going to be a cutout for the trails. But let's create a new material. I'm going to call this one text. Not text, just text. It's better. Let's add it to, it doesn't matter. You could add it to the null too. I just like to add it to the extrude. And let's go into that material. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable color, go into reflectance. I don't want the default specular, so I'm going to just delete that. I'm going to add a GGX, and then I'm going to add just 2% roughness, 100% reflection strength, no specular. I'm not using any bump. This is going to be, it's not going to be very visible at all. It's just going to add a little bit of color to the highlights. So I'm going to choose a color like a purple color, something like this. And this is not going to be very noticeable. This is just, we're just going to see a little bit of this in the reflections. So I'm going to click OK, and then I can close this. So let's turn off the grid here for a second. Perhaps frame this something like that. And then let's go to 130, let's go at 140, where the animation is finished. And let's test render this. Okay, so there's the render, and let me zoom back out a little bit. So, I mean, I think that's okay. I think that's fine. I can certainly tweak a lot of things in After Effects, and I would recommend not trying to get it 100% perfect here, because you're going to change a lot. You're going to add glows and some other things in After Effects, or Nuke, or whatever you do your post-processing. But I think this is a good start. Let me turn this off. Now, for the rendering, you want to make sure that, because you're using the standard renderer, which just works better with hair, but you want to make sure that your my anti-aliasing is set to best. And I already have that enabled. Well, this takes a little longer to render, or quite a lot longer, but it's important to do that. So one final scrub on the timeline. And coming to an end right there. So that's the end of the tutorial, and I hope that this inspires you to do some more things with the field force and the volume builder. There's so many possibilities, and I think we're going to see a lot of examples. It's pretty exciting, really cool stuff, to be honest. And the original files are available on velocitypeak.com for download, as well as the bus that I showed you earlier on. And that's it. Thank you for sticking around, and I'll see you next time.